Winter is coming, as they say in Game of Thrones. But there's more to the chilly forecast than icy fingers. It's also an economic prediction that turns out the mighty kingdom of Westeros might not be as wealthy as it thinks. That's right. Even in a fantasy realm filled with dragons and White Walkers, there are some very real lessons about money, power, and politics. Let's open up the Iron Bank vault and find out why these kingdoms were both thriving and tanking in ways you never noticed before. Okay. So let's start off our tour of Westeros' surprising economy with a look at how the kingdoms made their money. And then we'll see if the iron accountants at the Iron Bank would deem them solvent or overdrawn. The Reach, the bountiful breadbasket of Westeros, takes the crown for sheer volume of production. This lush, fertile land pumped out staggering amounts of food. Thanks to innovations like the water spout, which helped irrigate crops and supercharge harvests. Now, most folks think the Reach was all about farming. Well, yeah, that's a big part of it. They grew way more food than they could eat, so they sold the surplus to other kingdoms. But it wasn't just about the food. The Reach was an economic powerhouse. Other kingdoms relied on them because they had stuff like orchards, vineyards, and specialty foods like arbor, gold, wine. So the Tyrells used that power. They formed alliances through marriage and exchanged goods and favors. By controlling what went in and out of the markets, the Tyrells influenced prices and made a ton of coin. But here's the thing, relying on just one thing to make money is risky. What if there's a bad harvest or something? And that's what happened when the Tyrells lost control of the Reach, plunging Westeros into chaos. So even though the Reach was super rich at one point, their economy was vulnerable. Their riches were mostly in food, not gold or other stuff. So the lesson here seems to be diversification is important. Having a bunch of different sources of income can help you survive challenges like bad weather or, losing your head. Speaking of heads, the Lannisters definitely had one, and their wealth rivaled the Reach's abundance. The Westerlands were rich because of Casterly Rock, a massive gold mine. The Lannisters always had enough gold to hire armies and win battles. They were so loaded that even when they lost a lot of their forces, they could just pay new soldiers and keep going. Plus, they controlled major trade routes through the narrow sea, making them essential for moving goods. But having lots of gold doesn't mean you always make smart choices. The Lannisters spent a fortune building impressive castles and supporting the crown. But sometimes they didn't think about the cost. When Cersei made the Tyrells lose the Reach, she destabilized Westeros and hurt her own kingdom too. And then when Jaime got captured, they couldn't pay the Riverlands back for what they owed. So even though the Westerlands had tons of gold, they still ran into trouble. They spent lots of money keeping their image looking good and supporting the royal family, which made them seem generous. But this heavy spending also meant they couldn't save for unexpected expenses like war or natural disasters. The moral of the story is, even if you're loaded, you need to budget and plan ahead. Otherwise, you might end up with egg on your face. Metaphorically speaking, of course, because the Lannisters don't do eggs. Now let's talk about the Iron Islands. These rocky shores weren't exactly known for their balanced ledgers. In fact, their economy was built on pillaging and plunder. The Ironborn raided coastal settlements for food, slaves, and valuables. And they fiercely defended their right to pillage. But here's the catch. Raiding isn't a reliable way to make money. You can't plan for it or depend on it. It's all about luck and chance encounters. Plus, they kept getting into conflicts with other kingdoms over their nasty habit of taking what they wanted. The Iron Islands were essentially living on borrowed time, hoping the next raid would be fruitful. But that's not a solid economic strategy. Eventually, their reckless ways caught up with them, and their economy collapsed. So remember, raiding and pillaging may feel like a quick way to get what you want, but it's not a stable path to prosperity. Next stop, the North. This kingdom was all about rugged independence. The harsh winters and unforgiving terrain made life tough, which could explain why the North was so self-sufficient. They didn't rely on anyone else for survival. But here's where things get interesting. Because of their tough living conditions, the North didn't have many extra resources to trade. They mostly stuck to what they needed: furs, food, and timber. And since they weren't bringing in a lot of extra cash, they couldn't build a large navy or fund costly wars. But you know what? That might have been a good thing. It pushed them to focus on their own territory and keep their distance from the other kingdoms. They didn't want to get involved in other people's squabbles. But let's face it, being landlocked and not having much to trade doesn't exactly scream economic boom. The North's scarcity of resources might have contributed to their fierce desire for independence. After all, when you don't have much, you tend to hold on to what you do have pretty tightly. And finally, we have Dorne. Unlike the other kingdoms, Dorne was kind of a lone wolf. They had plenty of farms and traded things like silk and spices, but they also knew how to protect what they had. They had a strong military and were great at defense, which kept them safe from invaders. But here's the twist. They didn't just rely on their farms for money. They also had skilled builders who made roads, aqueducts, and buildings, and they charged other kingdoms for using their trading posts. Basically, Dorne combined farming, trade, and strategic know-how to carve out their own unique economic path. They weren't super reliant on anyone else, and they used their strengths to stay independent. So there you have it. Each kingdom had its own way of making money, but they were all working within the larger system of Westeros' economy. And that brings us to the heart of the matter, the Iron Throne. The rulers of Westeros saw themselves as the richest and most powerful, but were they really living paycheck to paycheck? Well, that's a complicated question. You see, King's Landing, the seat of the Iron Throne, didn't produce much of anything. The city was bustling, but it didn't farm, mine, or trade like the other kingdoms. Instead, it lived off the wealth and taxes of the other kingdoms. Every kingdom paid taxes to the Iron Throne, and those funds were supposed to ensure the realm's prosperity. But things didn't always go as planned. Sometimes the king spent too much on wars or building projects, or supporting the kingdoms, and that put a strain on the treasury. And when the Iron Throne couldn't manage their debt, they turned to the Iron Bank for emergency loans. Now, the bank wasn't just some random institution. It symbolized the broader financial struggles of Westeros. The realm's collective wealth was directly linked to the health of its individual kingdoms. When one kingdom suffered, the others felt it too. The Iron Throne's ability to stay afloat depended on keeping the peace and ensuring the prosperity of its subjects. But let's face it, Westeros was a hot mess. Constant power struggles, betrayals, and wars drained the treasury and left the Iron Throne drowning in debt. The realm's total wealth was only as strong as its weakest link, and in Westeros, there were plenty of weak links. In the end, Westeros' economy offers some hard truths about power, money, and the pitfalls of putting all your eggs in one basket. From the Reach's downfall due to over-reliance on agriculture to the Iron Islands' collapse from their raiding economy. Each kingdom's story is a lesson in financial strategy. Even the mighty Lannisters, with their seemingly endless gold supply, stumbled when they spent big on appearances and royal support. And let's not forget the ever-present struggle of the Iron Throne, symbolizing how the collective wealth of the realm was as vulnerable as its weakest kingdom. Westeros might be a world of dragons and White Walkers, but its economic woes are a timeless tale of greed, mismanagement, and the importance of planning for the future. So as we wrap up our journey through the Game of Thrones, consider this. The quest for power and riches is a tricky game. Sometimes the biggest threats come not from dragons or White Walkers, but from the choices we make today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Game of Thrones. If you've enjoyed this journey through Westeros' surprising economy, we'd love to hear about your favorite theories and moments. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more adventures into the worlds of pop culture and beyond. Until next time, may your coffers be full and your enemies few.